And in this scene, I just have a full material to create the rug. I have my rag doll and my supposed room. Then I have a sky object, which is going to lit the room. So this tutorial is not a lighting tutorial. It's just rendering tutorial. So basically physical render. And if you look here, I have an area light by the side, and this area light is just to give light through these holes here. So then you have a sunlight, which is also positioned such that it also comes in through this place. All right, so that is basically everything I have. So I only have just those three cameras that I want to look through and have that. So this is the camera we're going to be looking at. So basically this is everything we have in the scene. So what I'm going to do is to go over to my render settings, and I have this. So I don't want the colors to show. I just want to have a preset material for my render, just like a white material. So I'm going to activate material override. Now this is just for this tutorial purpose. If you want to put in your materials, then you can start putting materials on your models in the scene. Okay, so I want to override every material in the scene with this material. So I'm going to drag this. So by the time I render, instead of you having this red and yellow color, you have this material overriding everything. Now, that being said, the next thing is, even as much as I want that material to override everything, I don't want the material to affect the sky. So what I'm going to do is, I have a material for sky and also material for the rug. So I don't want this material to override those two things. What I'm going to do is come to this place, go to the material override. I want to exclude this material from it and also this air material. So by the time I start rendering it, this every other thing in the scene will have this material except the rug and also the sky. So I hope that I hope you understand that. All right, so let's look at some basic setting. I'm going to go over into my camera that I'm going to look through. So let's start from here. The output tells you the output you want. So what I just, for tutorial purpose, I'm going to reduce this to 600. So what I did is just to lock this ratio so that by the time I change this value, the proportion will be kept. So it calculates and gets me the actual proportion for that. So for this save, if you want to save, that's when you come here. I don't need to save anything. So under my option, I want to get rid of the default light. I don't want to simulate the default light, just this. Then I know in my scene I don't have subsurface scattering, so I'm going to get rid of the subsurface scattering. I don't have any refractive object or transparent object, so I'm going to get rid of this and that. I could also get rid of reflection, but I can just leave that. Now the reason I'm doing this is so that the software doesn't bug itself calculating things that are not in the scene, that are not needed in the scene. And I also do not have volumetric light, so I want to get rid of that. So that is what we can do here. Under our array threshold, I would want to increase this to something 1. And the threshold, the higher the value, the lesser the quality. But I found that 1 doesn't really have difference. You tend not to have difference between 1 and 0.1. So, and the ray depth, I also want to reduce these values. So now this reduces render time, but you don't really see any significant difference in the output. So that's why I choose this setting. Sometimes I even go as far as changing this to 3, but we can just go 1. Then that is that. Then the next thing we want to add into our scene for our physical render is to change this standard to physical. So physical will help us in everything we want to do here. So the next thing is just right click here, or you can go to the effects. I want to add in ambient occlusion and also global illumination. So I'm going to add in these two things here. For my ambient occlusion, I don't want to have complete black, so I just want to have an off black color. Then the dispersion, I don't want it to be too dispersed. Like ambient occlusion is just more like a contact shadow. So anywhere you have two objects having close contact, just like the hand of this ragdoll or the leg of the ragdoll and the sofa, you tend to have shadow under there. So the dispersion value will determine how the shadow will be dispersed. So I want to like squash that dispersion. I don't want it to be too much, so I can just bring this 50 so it doesn't spread out so much like that. So then for this global illumination, I'm going to start very simple. So I'm changing the sample to low. Then I'm going to, for speed purpose, I'm going to change this to QMC and no, let's just leave it there. Don't worry. We'll leave it at irradiance cache, then change the secondary method to light mapping. This is more like the best mapping we have. So I'll go to the irradiance cache, change this also to low. And if you try to open this record density, you have this value. So this is the sample rate, how Cinema 4D is going to render and how many times it's going to sample the whole scene before you get your final output. So basically it's going, you have between -1 and -3 means it samples for -1. This is the maximum rate. Then it samples for -2 and it samples for -3. So basically here you have 3 sample rates before you can have your final image shown to you. So increasing this value will increase the sample rate and also clean the image even much more. So what it means now, if I change this to 0, what is happening now is going to sample for 0, sample for -1, sample for -2, and sample for -3, making 4 samples. So I hope that is clear. So we can just let's go with 3 samples. And for here, I will come to the light mapping. I want to build radio city map. And I think that is pretty much it for this place. And coming to our physical render where we have the main thing we want to talk about. You have 2 tabs here. You have the basic and the advanced. And the advanced, we are not going to get into this for now. So we want to just base off our settings under this basic. So this, the basic property, you have the depth of field. This is self-explanatory. This is what activates your depth of field in the scene. So if you want to focus on a particular object and let every other part be defocused, so you can use your depth of field. So this is more for a still image. But when you're going to motion blur, though, this is more for an animation. So when you have an object animating, as it's animating, you tend to have a blurry transition between the current frame and the next frame. So it doesn't just go like that. You have that transition and the transition is being blurred. That is what this motion blur does. So if you have an animation in your scene, you can bring up your motion blur and set your sample. So we don't need any motion blur, we don't need any depth of field, so we're not activating this. So the main place we want to look is in our sampler. So we have 3 major types of sampling. We have fixed sampling, we have adaptive sampling, and we have progressive. So let me explain what fixed does. What fixed does is that fixed will calculate the number of sample between every part of your object. So what it means now is that the object closest to light will not have more information or more sample compared to the object farther away from the light. So a larger object also will not have more sample than a smaller object. So it's still the same amount of sample you have for the total amount of sample you have will be spread across every object in the scene. So no object is having more sample over. So in this case, the Cinema 4D renderer is not doing any work. It's just spreading across the whole sample, across the whole thing. So if I'm to render this now, I'm going to be doing a pause in between so that we can see what we have. So I'm going to be rendering into a picture viewer, and we will see what this will give us. This is our first rendering, and this is a lot. This is so bad. It doesn't really make sense. It's the information here. This image is just so grainy. You can already see that this is so grainy, and the reason why we're having this is because Cinema 4D is not doing any calculation here. You notice where you have this dark shadow, it's still the same number of sample you're having, so that's why you have this grain. That is what this fix does. So you have a sampling quality. All of them have this quality. So even if I change from fixed to adaptive, you still have a quality to choose from. If I change to progressive, this goes away. So progressive is more like interactive rendering. So as you change any information, you have that rendering and you can work around. So that is what progressive. So most of these GPU renderers, what make them unique and sought after is just the ability to render progressively as you're working. So as you're moving in the scene, this goes. So I'm going to change to adaptive. Then right now, as we change this value, if I go to preview, you see it gives me all these sample subdivision. I'm going to talk about this later on so you understand what they do. So, but all these are just presets. Changing this to low, they have preset value. So if I change this to medium, you can see that the value changes. So what are these values? What are they used for? What do they mean? So before I even talk about this, there is one more here where you have automatics. Now what this automatic does is, and also adaptive, before I talk about automatic. This adaptive, the difference between the fixed and the adaptive is that adaptive will allow Cinema 4D to think and calculate on a particular object that needs more sample. So if this part of this object doesn't really need more sample, you have enough of information to display here, then Cinema 4D will not, or the physical renderer will not waste most of all these samples on this section. It goes to the part that really needs detail, that really needs information, and add more samples and less samples to those parts you don't have. So I'm going to take this to low. You know, when we did this fix, the first one, it was low. So I'm going to put this to adaptive and also low and do another render. So we'll see difference between the two. Alright, so you can see the difference. You see the first render we used fixed. We had a lot of grains in the scene compared to this one, which is a lot cleaner. And if you look at this section here, just compare, you see. So let's make this A and make this B, so we can compare. So you see the difference between this. So if I bring this down, see that this has a lot of grains compared to this next one. So this is a lot cleaner compared to this. All right, so this should make us understand that, okay, adaptive gives you a cleaner result than fixed. So I personally do not use fixed rendering, so but just for the purpose of this tutorial, so I'm trying to explain to you why that is not there. But basically I don't really use fixed, I use adaptive. So that being said, let's go back into the setting. So if you go back to the setting, we are not coming to the progressive. I just explained that, so we are not doing that. What we need is just the explanation of all this, and I'm going to be going back to this and checking things, then explaining. So since we don't need this scene here, so what we can do is to just bring this setting over to this place here, then we can continue. So make this big. So as we are doing any setting here, we can always check what that output is giving us. Okay, so if we come over to this adaptive, and like I said, these are preset values, and to change this changes. Now if you change this from low to automatic, so what the automatic does is that it grays out all these things and only gives us this threshold. Now the threshold is more like the final property or the final cleaning of the whole thing. So if I want to have a more cleaner version of this, that means I have to reduce this shading error threshold. All right, then coming down here, sometimes we just render and change this. Before you come to this place and start changing, I would advise you first off work your way from this down upward. So I'm going to explain all this. And this down section gives you a more um, concise or a more specific things you want to touch. So if you look at this information here, I'm going to leave this as adaptive, and also I'm not going to have automatic. I'm going to change this to custom. So the custom will allow us change these values. So we'll look at these values, what they do. So, but let's work our way from here upwards. So once you are done changing your settings here, and if you feel you still need to up them up, then that's when you can come to this. This just okay, let me just explain that. All this sampling, what they do a global sampling. So this is more like a global subdivision sampling. So we have two sampling, so that does it globally. So when I say globally, it samples your shadows, your ambient occlusions, your light, your material, everything. It does it globally. It samples everything. And for your sampling, for your shading sampling, you have your minimum and your maximum. All right. So the minimum is start from 0, and the maximum sample we can get is 3. Do you understand? So that means working with these two values is doing it 2 times. I hope that understands. So you have a shading subdivision, minimum and maximum. So the minimum sample that a particular section can get will be 0, and the maximum sample that that same section will get is 3. So what it means that once, let's say for instance, we want to use the maximum sampling here. We'll sample this 3 times. After sampling this 3 times, then those 3 samples will now be done twice. I hope you understand. So meaning this section will now have more like 6 samples. So but if we have one subdivision, that means we're only going to get the 3 samples, and that's all. So I hope that that's just general on all. So but if you have 2, that means you have the 3 samples. You have the 3 samples on this side occurring twice. So if I make this 4, that means the 3 samples, the maximum 3 samples will occur here 4 times. So you have this sampling 3 times 4, which is 12 samples. So that is what this is talking about. So all this information you have here, they're just more global. But if you want to treat a particular section of this render, then that's when you can start picking this individual. So let's look at the first one. The first one is blurriness. So if you notice this information, you have some grains all around. So this blurriness subdivision maximum is what affects the clean information you get all around. So if I change this to 4, I'm just going to go overboard and re-render this. Then let's see what we're going to have for that. Okay, so I think I would just have to minimize this for a while and hit this render button so that renders. So I'm going to pause this and come back while this is done. All right, so you can see what we have. So you notice some splashes here, and that is kind of cleaner here. But then you can always up this information by going here and changing this. So if you look at the render time we have 54 as to the one we had before, which is 1 minute and 5 seconds. So we can still up this. Let's make this 8 and see the information we're going to get. So if you look down here, you also see some changes here. Okay, so also look at this section. It tries to clean up this, and but we still have some grains here. Okay, we still have some grains at the top here. So I'm upping this to 8, and let's see what will give us. So you can already see a lot of changes here. So all the darkness, you can see this, they are cleaned even more. So that is what this blurriness does. It just tries to clean up this. So let's look at this section. So I'm going to zoom into this section and do another render. So I'm going to change some things there. So you see where you have this contact. Remember I told you that this is ambient occlusion. So that means if we want to clean only the ambient occlusion, I don't have anything to do with every other thing. Then that means we have to come under our ambient occlusion subdivision and up this value. So I'm just going to go drastic. I don't want to be changing values. I'll just make this somewhat, let's say 6 for instance, and render and come back so that we can see what we have next. So I'm going to hit the render button and be back. You can see what we had before now. You see this shadow. You can see what we had before now. If I click this next render, you can see this is a lot smoother. Don't know if you can see that. This is a lot smoother compared to what we had. This was what we had before, and this is the new render. And if you look at this lap here, you can also notice what we had before, and if you bring it down, if I check, you see this is more smoother, a lot smoother. So that is what changes this information. So like I said, you don't want to just go to the global setting and start changing this information. So instead, what do? You start your way from here, and once you're done, you can now start upping this value, so, and also coming in. So since I don't have subsurface scattering, I'm going to bring this to 0, so I don't just have unnecessary calculation. All right, so what I also have shadow subdivision. So meaning for me to calculate for these shadows, I can also do some subdivision on this shadow here. So I'm going to come here. So let me zoom in here so you can, before I change this setting, here. So I want to do a change here. So let's also still up this. I'm going to up this to 8. And by the way, my advice, you don't just up these values like that. I know that my system can carry that. That's why I'm upping that. You should just start gradually and see. Just be patient with it, and that will help you. So I'm going to do another render and see the effect of the shadow that I have here. All right, so the stuff is still rendering, and we are already at 4 minutes plus. So you can see what we had before. You see a lot of grains, and just by upping this shadow subdivision, we have a cleaner render. And also, if you look at the shadow, here, it's a lot cleaner here. All right, so can we say that this is a lot cleaner? But now the downside is it's taking our render time. So this is where we will start working and changing some things and reducing some values. So in this case now, we notice that the previous one, without changing the shadow, our render time was 1 minute 1 second. Now this is still rendering. If you see, it's still rendering, and we're already 5 minutes. So that means changing this was a bad idea, but even though it gave us a clean render, was a bad idea. So what we can do is, instead of us changing this value that much, we could just bring this to somewhere here and increase this. Then this is just to compensate for that, and also maybe reduce this a little bit to work with. Then that is for that. I'm going to still do a render of this. Then you can also come here and start changing these values here. All right, so we want to have a subdivision. We want to have 1 as the minimum, so that a section will at least have 1 subdivision, 1 sample. and the maximum I want to have is let's say 3, then we will go 3 times. All right, then for this threshold, let's just bring this threshold down to 12, sorry, to 15, and just to work our way from there and do another render and see what we're going to have. So you can notice this is still taking long to render. Now the reason why it's taking this long in this section is because it has a lot of calculation to do in the cushion. You remember that you have some shadows interaction, so it has to do some calculation here. You can see that this is a lot cleaner compared to what we had before. If we start working our way down, you see this was with the fixed, this was with the adaptive with low settings, then started changing the values, and this was the last render, and this is now the new one. You can notice that this is a lot cleaner. And if I also look at somewhere here, this is a lot cleaner compared to what we had there. And you can already start seeing detail on this light. You can see the strand that makes up the light, which you couldn't really see well previously. So that is to let you know that okay, this is changing this information and you're having more of this value. So now another thing I always do is I want also like increasing, or I also like changing the samples on my lights. So the light shining in here, I want to increase the quality or change the quality of the light. So what I can do is to select the lights, then come over to the detail. If I'm correct, then you will have a section for your sample. So you have your, what is it? Okay, so this is a sample. So the default value you're going to have is not 100. I think it's 20 or 25 about. So let me just put in a light so you see what I was talking about. So area light. So this area light, if you go to this detail, okay, so the default value you're going to have is 40. So with that 40 default light value, you won't really have enough. Then you can up this value. So let's say I want this to be 128. And also for the sun, look for a sample value to change. So I think that is here. I think the sun doesn't really have a sample value to work with. So basically it's just more like okay, the only thing you just have a sample distance. So but the sample itself is on the area light, and we have changed that. That is what will give us a better quality of that light. Okay, so let me up this and look at this setting. So we've already changed these values and that, and I think let's just do a final settings. And so since you understand all these things, we just do a final setting and do the render, and let's see what we'll have. So I'm going to make this 6 and make this 4. So this is going to take longer time because remember it's going to sample 3 times 4. So I'm going to have like 12 samples on one section, at least maximum of 12 samples and minimum of 4 samples. So you understand, the minimum of 4 samples being that you have 1 times 4. So there is no part of this scene that will not have a sample, right? Then the threshold is going to be looking at is 50%. So once it samples up to 50% of it with that 4 section, then it's 15% rather than it goes. Okay, so I'm going to also up this value back to the 1280 rather. Then possibly increase this resolution to 300, and I think that is pretty much it. So I'm going to render this, pause, and be back for what we have as the final. So we could just bring this back to 10. Let's just make it 12 and be on the safer side. And before I do anything, I'll save my scene so that if anything happens, I still have those settings. So this is going to be final scene render. So we have that. So I'm going to do my final render here. So I'll be back once this is done. All right, guys, welcome back. I actually slept off. My system got shut down and due to battery, so I had to do a render, and this is what we have. So coming up and waking up and seeing this, I did one render which I had this, and then just tweak some settings to get this. So these are just the things I did. If you look through your settings, I changed the physical render. I increased this and also reduced this shading. Then I increased the blurriness to 16 and so on. So these are just the settings that I changed for that. And for the global illumination, I introduced a gamma 2.2. Then I moved this sample to medium. And here, it's still the same setting I had before. So that's just the only thing I changed. And that gives me this. So this is pretty fine, and just considering the fact that okay, we are doing a test render with physical render and we are having a good interaction of light and everything looks fine. But if you feel you still want to up this, you want to do some color correction and post compositing on it, then you can also do that here before you even go to Photoshop. There is a section here in your render setting where you have in your render view rather, where you have your filter. If you click on your filter and click on enable filter, that can allow you to do some settings. So you can change your brightness, your contrast. You can change the contrast here and have some more settings. So let's say this is 0.4, hit tab, and I think 0.3 is fine. Don't want it to, because I still want to have detail, because if you notice, if you go so much, you start having your detail is lost here. So you also do not want to be too much in your settings. Then you can also do your saturation. Oh, this is just a grayscale render. So if you have some coloring to it, you can do your saturation here. So you can already see that increasing this is having a hue of yellowish color to it, and I'm having a cool feel. So you can do your setting here. I think I like this. Oh, no. Oh, all right, I think I like this. This is fine. So you have your contrast, can add more contrast or reduce here. So let's bring this back to 0. You have your brightness, you can set your brightness here. So this is there for you to set. Then if you come down, you have a whole lot of things to work. You have your curve. So your normal curve in Photoshop, you can also work with this and have a very good information. So I think that's pretty much it for this tutorial, and I'm going to put down link in the description for more tutorials, and there are similar tutorials to this that I want you to please just check up, and do have a wonderful day, and God bless you. Bye.